Alright, let's check out how good metagross is in this game. My opponent leads with the Braviary, I start with the Jolteon. On the first turn, they immediately switch into the Muk as I decide to set up a substitute. On the next turn, I severely overestimate Jolteon as I go for the Thunderbolt, get a disappointing amount of damage. They go for the knockoff, break the sub. Realizing that I can't do too much and expecting another knockoff, I go into my Keldeo. They go for the knockoff, do barely anything, and give me that justified boost. Unfortunately, they get the poison and I lose my lefties. The sad part is this Keldeo actually does not have any physical moves, so I can't even take advantage of my boost, as my Surf does absolutely nothing. I go for Surf one more time, which Muk takes no problem. Goes for the Poison Jab, doesn't quite take me out, but the Poison does. That's okay though, because I go into the star of the video, the metagross, go for the Earthquake, take out the Muk. My opponent then goes back into the Braviary, starts flexing right in front of my face, gets those boosts. I go for the knockoff, get some good damage and knock off his boots. Not wanting to hog all the spotlight, I switch into my Jolteon. He goes for the close combat, Jolteon just hangs on. Wanting to preserve his Braviary, he then switches into the Hisui Decidueye. I go for the Thunderbolt, do barely anything. Expecting the fighting move, I switch into my Hatterene, but he ends up going for the Leaf Blade, gets some good damage. Knowing he can't break through Hatterene, he goes for the U-turn, and uses that to pivot right back into the Braviary. I follow up with the Draining Kiss, do barely any damage. On the next turn, he's able to outspeed, goes for the Brave Bird, takes out my Hatterene. I'm having a real hard time breaking through these two birds, so I go back into the Jolteon, he switches into the Decidueye. I make the aggressive play, go for the Terra Ice, Terra Blast, get some huge damage, but my opponent's about to match me right here. On the next turn, Decidueye goes for the Terra Steel, as I go for the Terra Blast and do barely any damage. He goes for the Roost, gets almost all of his health back. After all that, I decide to leave my Jolteon in, go for the Thunderbolt, do some good damage. He goes for the Triple Arrow, takes out my Jolteon. After losing Jolteon, I then go back into the MVP of the video, the metagross, and decide to set up those late game Stealth Rocks as Decidueye goes for the U-turn and uses it to pivot into the Poltegeist. Thankfully, Metagross is not afraid of Ghosts as I go for the knockoff, take him out in one shot. Unfortunately, they get the Curse Bite, but Metagross does not care. My opponent goes back into one of those pesky birds, but doesn't matter. Metagross is able to outspeed, goes for the Earthquake, takes him out. The other annoying bird from before comes in, takes big damage from those rocks, goes for the Roost, gets a nice chunk of his health back. Metagross goes for the Heavy Slam, gets some big damage. Braviary then fires off to close combat. Metagross tanks that no problem. Go for another Heavy Slam, take out the Braviary. After finally getting rid of those two birds, my opponent reveals their next Pokemon, the Fortress. I decide to start off by going with the knockoff, get rid of those lefties. He goes for the Rapid Spin, gets that speed boost, gets rid of my rocks. You are now about to witness some terrible luck for the Metagross as I go for the Iron Head. I get the first flinch. I think you can see where this is going. Fortress goes for another Iron Head. Metagross flinches again. Fortress then fires off another Iron Head, but thankfully I'm able to break through this time to set up my Stealth Rock again. Not wanting to chance another flinch, I decide to switch into my Vivillon. He goes for the Iron Head, gets some good damage. I'm then able to outspeed and put that Menace to sleep. With Fortress sleeping, my opponent then reveals their final Pokemon, the Articuno. I go for the Quiver Dance, get those boosts. Able to outspeed, I go for the boosted Hurricane, get some good damage. He goes for the Free Drive, Vivillon just hangs on. I go for another Hurricane, but completely whiff this time. He goes for the Roost, goes back to full health. I'm then able to connect with this Hurricane, get some good damage. He goes for the U-turn, takes out my Vivillon, and uses to pivot right back into Fortress. I then reveal my final Pokemon, the Corviknight. I go for the Brave Bird, gets some good damage, but after smashing into Fortress, he wakes up, goes for the Volt Switch, uses it to pivot right back into the Articuno. He's able to outspeed, goes for the Roost, goes right back to full health. Corviknight goes for the Brave Bird, gets some good damage. Articuno then fires off the Free Strike, gets some good damage. I go for the Roost, get some good health back. Realizing I'm not getting too far, I decide to mix things up right here as I go for the Body Press, but that does absolutely nothing. So I decide to switch back into the big boss, the Metagross, as I tank another Freeze Dry. Not wanting to deal with Metagross, the Articuno goes for the U-turn, uses to pivot right back into the Fortress, but unfortunately his health is getting dangerously low. Go for the Heavy Slam, take him out. My opponent's last Pokemon is in the Articuno from before. He goes for the Freeze Dry, Metagross eats that up. I go for the Heavy Slam, finally take out all of his birds. Good game. Alrighty, in this next game we're gonna let Tropius show off a little bit. My opponent starts off with the Ace-Up, I start with the Whimsicott. With Prankster, I fire off the priority Leech Seed as he goes for the knockoff, gets rid of my lefties. I start getting some of that passive recover as I then set up the Substitute. Azelf's not having any of that, fires off the Fire Blast, breaks my sub. I then make a very poor play, go for the Moonblast, do barely anything. He goes for the Fire Blast, connects, takes out my Whimsicott. I then reveal my next Pokemon, the Regirock. He's able to outspeed, goes for the knockoff, gets rid of my Chesto Berry. I go for the Iron Defense, get those boost. Since Regirock completely walls as Azelf, he goes for the U-turn, uses that to pivot into the Sceptile. I'm then able to catch the Sceptile with the Stone Edge, get some good damage. Expecting the Grass move, I go for the Terra Fighting as he goes for the Leaf Stone, which I just survived. He gets a special attack lower. I go for the Body Press, take out the Sceptile. My opponent then reveals the big bad legend across my Duskmane, gets a little greedy, goes for the Dragon Dance. I go for the Body Press, take him out at one shot. After all that, my opponent goes back into the lead Azelf, goes for the Psychic, takes out Regirock. After my opponent ties things up, I go into my Umbreon. He goes for the knockoff, gets barely any damage, gets rid of those lefties. I go for the Foul Play, take out the Azelf. My opponent's next Pokemon is in the Kilowattrel. He goes for the Thunder Wave, gets the Paralyze. I try to synchronize, but it doesn't go too well. It's okay though, I go for the Toxic. The Electric Bird then fires off the Hurricane, does barely any damage, but unfortunately I get that full para. On the next turn, the Kilowattrel goes for the U-turn, gets some good damage, and uses the pivot into the Excadrill, who starts breaking that mold. I go for the Foul Play, get some great damage. Unfortunately, Excadrill is able to outspeed, goes for the Iron Head, takes out my Umbreon. That allows me to go into my second MVP, the Tropius, who takes some big damage from the Rock Slide, but thankfully has the Citrus Berry. I'm then able to set up my Leech Seed and get some of that passive recovery going. The Excadrill then fires off another Rock Slide, gets some big damage, but Tropius is able to hang on, and I decide to set up a Substitute. After all that, the Leech Seed is finally able to take out the Mole. My opponent then goes back into the Poison Bird, who's able to outspeed, go for the Thunderbolt, take out my sub. I set up another Leech Seed. Tropius is about to get some luck here as a Harvest activates, gives me a Citrus Berry, eat that, get some nice health back, which I follow up with the Protect to keep that passive damage ticking. On the following turn, Kilowattrel was able to connect with the Thunderbolt. I go for the Air Slash, do barely any damage. Thankfully, the Leech Seed and the Toxic finally take the bird down. And after all that, Tropius gets one more Harvest and all that health back. My opponent then reveals a final Pokemon, the Gramble, who tries to intimidate Tropius. Doesn't matter, set up the Leech Seed. He goes for the Play Rough, I tank that. And then my opponent forfeits. Good game. Alrighty, and that's the video. Please let me know what you guys think down below and stay tuned for future content. Peace.